very easily. All righty. How many of you by nature are very curious people? Wonder how things work. How many of you are people? You know, you like to talk to people. You like to find out what makes them tick. Okay. How many of you like to tell stories? Now here's the tough part. How many of you think you can tell those stories on deadline? Not as many hands going up.
Come on, guys, you know you can.
How many of you think that if we had a newscast to do here at 2, that you could pull a story together in 32 minutes and be the lead story?
I got it.
You got it?
Yes, sir.
That's what I'm talking about. That's kind of what we do, okay? Journalists, whether we cover sports, news, law, entertainment, politics, crime, wars, okay, we tell stories. And so to tell stories, we have to obviously know the story. And to know the story, that means we have to be curious people. And to be curious people, that means we have to ask the right questions. So there's a whole litany of things that goes into being a great journalist, no matter what it is you cover. My story real quick, I grew up in Chicago. That's why I've lived in Miami for the past few years, because I like the warm weather. I don't miss the snow. But I grew up in Chicago, and when I would get home from school in the afternoon, the Chicago Cubs games were always on TV. Wrigley Field at the time did not have lights. It was the only baseball field in the major leagues that did not have lights, so the Cubs had to play their games during the day. So when I got home from school mid-afternoon, I was in elementary school still, the Cubs would be on. And the Cubs were, you know, everybody loves the Cubs. You know, if you've seen that, they've got this great fan base and a great following, even though certainly when I was a kid and up until recently, they've been pretty terrible. But they had this announcer named Jack Brickhouse who never seemed to have a bad day. And for whatever reason, I was drawn not only to watching the Cubs, but also to watching him. And I wondered, well, what is it that, you know, about him that makes him enjoy this so much? I mean, he would just be so full of life. And, you know, hi, I'm Jack Brickhouse, and, well, another tough day for the Cubs. They got better today, though. They only lost 18-3. But I don't mind because I got the game for free. He really seemed to just glow, and so I was curious, well, what is it about this job that makes people, you know, love it? So I started watching him and other sportscasters, and then I started paying attention to the news. I started watching the newscasters in Chicago and network news, and pretty soon I sort of got an idea that this might be a path for me. So I followed my path to Northwestern University, the Medill School of Journalism, which is still one of the best journalism schools in the country. I think it's the best. And there, I learned all those things that I told you about right off the top, about writing on deadline, interviewing people, getting the story, and putting it in a way that makes sense, that's interesting to your readers, your listeners, your viewers. That's what we do. And with broadcasting, you have an added burden, because generally people are so distracted. You know, think about your own homes. You know, there's right a lot of noise, and the dogs, and your brothers, and your sisters, and people going 80 different directions. So folks are sort of half paying attention. So as a journalist, a broadcast journalist, you've really got to be someone who can capture their attention and tell them the story right now. Because it's not printed, it's not a newspaper, it's not a magazine where they can read it and go back and reread what it is you just said. So you got to say it right the first time. So you got to get it right and make sure that it makes sense to people. So that's the art of broadcast journalism and the art of broadcast journalism writing. Okay. I understand you guys have done some print journalism stuff, correct? You have? Okay. So so you know about the lead, right?
Yeah.
Okay. So in broadcast journalism, the lead is just as important as even more so important. So you said you guys watched the Dolphin game last night, right?
Yeah.
Okay. You watched the Dolphin game last night?
Some of it.
Some of it, huh? Couldn't bear to watch most of it, could you? Okay. So I'm going to nominate you. Come on up for a second. All right, Mr. Superstar. So those Dolphins. What was the score last night? Final score, do you remember?
24-7.
Nah,
36.
36-7. Okay. Tell me about that game. What you remember? What did you see? What happened in that game, in a nutshell?
The Dolphins. Okay, well, the Patriots scored off of a 47-yard reception.
Yep.
The first quarter.
Yep. Tom Brady to Rob Gronkowski.
Yeah.
What else?
And after that, I can't even remember.
Can't remember. Anybody else? Yep, thank you.
They got their first safety in 3 years.
Who?
The Patriots got their first safety in 3 years.
What happened?
Ryan Tannehill got tackled in the end.
He wasn't ready.
Miscommunication. Oh yeah, no, the snap.
Wasn't ready for the snap?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. Okay, then what happened?
Yeah, his face was like,
Then they scored a field goal.
Who? They who?
Patriots.
Okay. They who? The Patriots scored a field goal. Then what? You guys said you watched the game.
They got an interception.
They who?
The Patriots.
All right.
Tannehill.
What was the score at halftime? Anybody remember?
9-2.
No.
19-0.
19 to 19 to nothing. 0 is a numeral. Nothing is the an amount. Okay. Little journalist things that you pick up as you go. So 19 to nothing at halftime. So then what happened? Second half.
Opening drive, they scored a touchdown.
They who?
Dolphins.
Okay. So it was 19 to 7 then.
19-7.
Come on, I'm pulling it out of you guys. I'm pulling. Don't make me a dentist here. Tell me what happened. What happened?
Brady scored.
Okay. Then the Patriots scored a couple of touchdowns, and Tom Brady to Julian Edelman made it look pretty easy. The Patriots ended up winning 36-7. That's what happened, right? Right. So the Dolphins, yeah, so it's really kind of a tough game for the Miami Dolphins. This might be a microphone, so that maybe I'm in Foxborough. I'm in front of you guys, but maybe I'm actually in Foxborough, Massachusetts right now. The Dolphins have just lost to the New England Patriots 36-7. Rough night for the Dolphins, especially quarterback Ryan Tannehill. Looked so brilliant last week as he completed 18 of 19 passes last week. Tonight, against the Patriots, a far different story. Tannehill under siege, sacked 5 times, threw a couple of interceptions, and had a big miscommunication with center Mike Pouncey, where the ball was snapped. Tannehill wasn't even looking, wasn't even expecting it. Ball rolls into the end zone. He plops on it for a safety, and after that, it was all downhill. So the Dolphins lose the game, but perhaps even more damaging, they lose their best pass rusher, Cameron Wake, who tore his Achilles tendon, so he is going to be out for the season. A devastating loss for a team that relies on Wake to produce the pass rush that they consistently need. So now the Dolphins have to regroup in a major way. Their new interim head coach, Dan Campbell, who has been a guy who has captured the hearts of fans here in South Florida, now has to figure out a way to regroup. He says he wants his team to be tough and physical. Well, now he's got his first challenge, coping with his first loss as a head coach. So that's what we do, okay? So we sum it up, and what allows us to do that? First, paying attention, paying close attention. So when you're watching the Dolphin game, okay, and you're kind of watching it as a fan, it's different than watching it as a journalist, okay? I didn't bring my scribble, but I should have, because I had a legal pad. As I was watching the game, I was charting the whole game and what happened during these drives and making notes of what happened. And why did the Dolphins decide when they won the opening toss to defer and give the ball to the Patriots? Why did they do that? I'll make a note of that. And what happened on the first drive and the second drive and so on. And the numbers, as the statistics of this game, they help tell the story of what happened, okay? If you become a political reporter and you're covering an election, okay, the statistics, the numbers, will help tell the story. Well, Rubio outpolled Bush in the Florida primary by so many votes, as opposed to New Hampshire, as opposed to what happened in South Carolina. So what does that mean? What's the trend? Okay? Donald Trump had raised $12 million in April. In August, he only raised $3 million. What does that mean? So as journalists, it's your job to sort of get the information in front of you and make sense of it, okay? So now, since the Dolphins head coach is Dan Campbell, right? Who can tell me about him? What's his story? Yes, sir.
6 years ago, he played in the NFL.
Yes.
As tight end.
Yep.
3 different teams.
Mm-hmm.
And because of injuries, he
He quit.
Yeah, and then he was a coach for the Dolphins, and he's been a coach since.
Got it. He's been
Tight
tight ends coach for
He
you.
started as an intern.
For you guys who don't follow football, a tight end, that's a position, you know, and so there's the head coach, and then there's all these other coaches, and they coach different guys on the team, and so he was one of the guys who coached these guys who played this certain position, the same position that he played when he was a player. Okay. And so how did he end up being head coach?
Philbin was fired. Stephen Ross.
Philbin got fired?
As the intern coach.
The previous coach got fired.
Great.
Why?
Because he was doing a bad job.
He was doing a bad job.
There was higher expectations on
For all the money we
two of his last 3 years.
Yeah, the Dolphins started 1-3. They were expected to be a great team. They lost 3 of their first 4 games. The owner wasn't happy. Joe, you got to go. So they pulled this guy in. Had he ever been a head coach before?
No.
So why'd they pick him?
Full of energy.
What's it what?
Full of energy.
Energy. Okay. And how has the team responded?
They love Ray. They love Ray.
Why? Why do they love him?
They can
said
relate
they
to
wanted
him
to
so
be
much.
not interim. They wanted to be.
But why?
full-time.
Why?
Because he like pumps them up
Yeah.
before games. He like gets everyone.
Okay.
Players can relate to
So,
him.
so there's an underlying story there, okay? One of many. Okay, there's a football team, but there are also personalities and people on this team. And your job as journalists, whatever you decide to cover, is to also do the stories about those people and those personalities and what makes them interesting. That's right. This was a guy who, up until a few weeks ago, thought he was just going to be one of the assistants, along for the ride. And then things go sideways for the team, and all of a sudden, he's the head man. So now, and his style, the players have bought into. Why? Yeah, because they identify with him because he's kind of a macho-looking dude. You know, and he's cut, and he was a former player. The guys relate to that. And he thinks like they do, okay? And so they like that. He's made the practices tougher. He says if you practice hard, you should be able to play hard on Sunday. So my point is simply this. Again, whether you're covering sports, journalism, fashion, entertainment, politics, law, there are people, stories to do. And stories about those people. And so if you're going to do a story about those people, then you have to know their story. And you've got all this information now that allows you to learn about people. You can Google them, you can follow them on Twitter, you can do all these things. The new school way to find out information about people. But you can also do it the old school way and talk to and interview people who know them best. And say, well, why? Why, and Dominic Sue, do you like Dan Campbell as a coach? Why, Ryan Tannehill, do you like this guy as a head coach? Okay? So my point is that covering sports is more than just covering the games. It's also about covering the players and the things around the games. Okay? Dan Campbell is a story that people who don't care at all about sports can relate to. Someone who works hard at what they do and who gets the opportunity, and boom, when the opportunity is there, man, he's ready for it. And he doesn't want to just be the interim head coach, the temporary guy, the stopgap guy. No. He wants to be the guy from this point forward. So as a good journalist, your job is to tell the story about Dan Campbell and tell it in a way that somebody who could care less about football can relate to, because they see something in themselves, a family member, a friend. That Dan Campbell story, yeah, that touches them. So, my story. So I go to Northwestern, real quick. I go to Northwestern, and I'm doing what you guys do. Our facilities back then, when I was in college, were nowhere near what you guys have here in high school, but they taught us how to write. And they taught us how to write well. And they taught us how to write fast. And they taught us how to go out and interview people. And they taught us how to take those stories, that information. And so my senior year, I figured, well, while I was there at Northwestern, I worked for the campus radio station. Okay, and I did like play-by-play of the high school games are in Evanston, Illinois, just north of Chicago. I said, hey, this is pretty cool. And I would go out and do some political stories. So maybe I'll cover sports, maybe I'll cover news, I don't know. I figured I'd get a start in radio until a professor said, hey, you know what? You're not a bad-looking guy. I said, well, thank you. Maybe you ought to try to do television. So I said, really? So another professor who saw that I was trying, said, I'll tell you what, Jim, there's a studio in Chicago, and if you can get down there, I'll let you cut your audition tape there in Chicago. I said, well, that's great, but I don't have the money to pay for that. He says, I got you. So he paid for the studio time. so that I could do my first audition tape. Now mind you, this was back in the day when brothers like me had our hair like out to here. And I had the sideburns like out to here. And I wore these shoes that made me look like I was 7 feet tall. I was a scary looking guy. But I cleaned myself up enough to do that audition tape. And what I did was stuff that I had done for the college radio station. I did a commentary about the Northwestern University football team and how bad it was because they lost like 29 games in a row when I was there. And we were a smart school, but we couldn't play football at all. And I did some political stuff, and that was my audition tape. That's how we get hired in television and broadcasting, okay? You guys speak well in front of me, those of you who have raised your hands. But if you want to get hired in television on the air, you're going to be judged by how well you come across on camera. How well do you speak? How comfortable are you in front of the camera? And so potential employers are going to look at that. They're going to probably, it's not going to be fair, they're going to look at your tape for the first 30 seconds and they'll say, well, maybe, okay, we'll put them in the maybe pile. If they don't like it, we'll put it in the no thanks pile. Then they go back and look at all the maybes and they'll decide if maybe you're one of the ones they want. That's how it works. So I did my audition tape, and that professor was nice enough to send it to CBS News in New York. There was no way in the world I was going to get hired by CBS News in New York right out of college, okay? But they had a deal where they had a few internships around the country at some of their stations. And so they said, well, this guy with the long sideburns and the big afro, maybe we'll give him a chance. So we'll send him to Charlotte, North Carolina, because that's where they sent me. WBTV, that was my first real TV job, okay? And that's where I learned what this business was all about. So I was going out and doing stories. I was hired as a news reporter trainee, not sports. News reporter trainee. Hey, there was a job there. I was on the air. I grew up in Chicago, mind you. I said goodbye, Mom, goodbye, Grandma, my friends, I love you, but I got to go to Charlotte, North Carolina. I didn't know a soul in Charlotte, North Carolina, but that was the place that was going to give me a start in TV. So I got there, and within a year, I went from being an intern trainee to a full-time reporter to starting to anchor a little bit. When I left, I was the #3 news anchor and reporter at that station. I left there and went to Washington, D.C., WJLA. Now, Charlotte was, at the time, was market number 32. Television markets are ranked by size, okay? So the smaller the market, that means the smaller the number of people watching. The bigger the market, the more people are watching. Who can guess what the #1 market, local market in the United States would be? Come on, country day.
LA.
Come on, hello.
New York.
No, Los Angeles is #2. New York is #1. Right. New York's #1, LA 2, Chicago 3, and so on and so on. Washington was the 9th largest. So I went from the 32nd market to the 9th market. Boom, after I'd been in Charlotte for four years or so. So that's a pretty good leap. So from Charlotte to Washington, I was in Washington, D.C., covering news, anchoring news on the weekends, covering all kinds. I mean, Washington, D.C. is like, wow, the oracle of history. I'm going in to do stories at the White House and the Supreme Court, and I'm Mr. Serious Newsman, and I think that that's where I'm going to cut my teeth, and I'll be following in the footsteps of Walter Cronkite and all those, Dan Rather, and all those great journalists. And out of the blue came an opportunity to cover sports in Washington. So I took a detour to cover sports. I started covering sports in Washington, D.C. right as the Redskins had their powerhouse teams and went to the Super Bowl. And from Washington, I came to Miami, WSVN. In Washington, I was the #2 sportscaster. I wanted to be the #1 guy. I wanted to be the starting quarterback. I didn't want to be the backup. I wanted to be the starter. So I left a slightly large market to come to Miami because I wanted to start. So I came to Miami, WSVN. I spent a few years there, and then CBS said, hey, this guy is, kind of like his style, so maybe we'll grab him. Where are we going to put him? Chicago. Hey, that's where I grew up. So I went to Chicago. Went to Chicago for a few years, and then CBS and here in Miami made a lot of big changes and said, well, we now want to compete in Miami because this is a booming market. Jim, we hear they really like you in Miami. Would you be interested at all in going back to Miami if we made the deal right? And I said, well, it was 15 below zero up here the other day, so maybe if you make it interesting enough for me, I'll do it. And they said, we will. They did, so I did, and boom. Came back to WFOR. So that's my story in a nutshell. What do I do now? I'm the main sports anchor at WFOR, which means that I cover the local teams here in Miami. Of course, we cover national stories, but our primary focus is what's happening here in Miami with the Heat, the Dolphins, the Hurricanes, the Marlins, the Panthers. Been a lot of change, as you sports fans know, in Miami. This is a very exciting market. Just this year alone, a lot has happened. A couple of coaches have been fired and so on. At WFOR, we are the Dolphins station, which means that we air most of their games because of our affiliation with CBS, and we do a lot of programming on our own to tie into the Dolphins. Yes.
Do you cover fifth quarter?
I am the anchor of the fifth quarter, yeah. So what I want to do real quick, I know how much time is 2:10 as this ends? So we're gonna move along then. Show you a little clip of some stuff that we've done, and you guys can start asking me some questions, and I'll tell you a little bit more. This is hey, what's up, Jim? This is
Stadium today, the onslaught definitely on for the Miami Dolphins. Good afternoon, I'm Jim Barry. This is the fifth quarter post-game show, and what a day, what a game for the Dolphins. Well, the Dolphins want to prove last Sunday was no fluke. Can they even their record at home against the Texans? We'll talk about it next on Dolphins Weekly Live.
It's our talk with these, and I know how I feel. I know you feel.
the other thing off the top of the show. Was I reading or was I talking? Could you tell when I stopped reading and when I started talking?
No.
So, let's talk about some of the acquired skills that you need, because in that little sequence I did both. There was a little teleprompter there in the studio, that just like you guys have in there, that I read from briefly. Then I switched off of the prompter and just started talking like I am now. So the key to being an effective broadcaster is to talk one-on-one to your audience. You're not speaking to an auditorium. Hey, look at me. You're not speaking to an auditorium, you're talking to one person. What's your name? I didn't hear you.
Solana.
Solana. Thank you, Solana. It also helps, yes, project. So Solana, and who's your best friend, Solana?
Luna.
Luna.
Yeah.
So Solana, when you go on TV, okay, working for WFOR in another 7 or 8 years, then you're going to be talking to Luna just one-on-one. What's the thing you think you know the most about? Tell me, anything. Tell me.
Baking.
Baking?
Yeah.
So when you have your own cooking show, you're talking to Luna about this recipe that you discovered at this restaurant in Coral Gables called Portneek on the Mile. It's one of my favorite restaurants. And you got the cookbook from the owner, who's got a fascinating story, by the way. You try her recipe, and you're on that cooking show, and you're going to be able to tell Luna what makes this recipe so different, because the way she mixes the spices are just the right touch of this. You're not going to be talking to everybody, but everybody will be watching. That's the key, okay? So that's an acquired skill, okay? So an acquired skill is you have to be able to read out loud, but it has to sound like you're not reading. It has to sound like you're speaking. How do you make that happen? Anybody tell me?
Practice. Practice.
There it is. There it is. Practice. You got to be able to practice. And there's no manual for this, okay? The television station is not going to hire you and say, hey, we like you, so here, read this manual on becoming a great journalist. No. It's sink or swim, and it's your own initiative. And if you have the initiative and you work at it, you will get better. But trust me, if you don't, and if you don't care, there are plenty of other people who will move you right out of the way and take your job. This is a great, wonderful business for people who are motivated and who want to be the best. It is a terrible business for lazy people. If you don't care, don't get in. Okay? What other